Welcome to the November 13th edition of the Alta Mesa Center for the Arts second Sunday reading series. Today we feature poet, novelist, and playwright, cultural worker, Jewelle Gomez with Joan Steinau Lester. I'm thrilled for this event. I'm glad that you're here. If you're not here with us in the moment, welcome to those of you who are watching this video later on. Alta Mesa Center for the Arts is an interfaith arts and spirituality hub housed within and sponsored by Orinda Community Church. We believe that art is a spiritual act and a human right. We wish to provide a place where people from diverse traditions, artistic practices, and economic realities come together in community. We know that art can bridge the divisions, the substantive and the arbitrary that divide us. We come together not only to practice and teach the arts, but to celebrate and learn from our differences and to foster lively and respectful interdisciplinary dialogues. We seek unity in diversity. Wherever you are on your artistic or your spiritual journey, whoever you are welcome here. Now, Jewelle Gomez is a poet, playwright, and cultural worker. Her 8 books include 3 collections of poetry and the first Black lesbian vampire novel called The Gilda Stories, which I was introduced to this summer and absolutely loved, read twice back to back. Her work has appeared in numerous anthologies, including Red Indian Road, West, Dark Matter, The Century of Speculative Fiction from the African Diaspora, Oxford Treasury of Love Stories, and Luminescent Threads, Connections to Octavia Butler. Her plays Waiting for Giovanni and James Baldwin and Leaving the Blues about Alberta Hunter were produced in San Francisco and in New York City. She's the former president of the San Francisco Public Library Commission and was on the founding board of the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. Her new collection of poetry, Still Water, was published in June 2022, and her new play, Unpacking in P-Town, will premiere in the New Conservatory Theater in San Francisco next year in 2023. Her conversation partner, Joan Steinau Lester, Dr. Steinau Lester, is an award-winning commentator and author. Her most recent book is the memoir, Loving Before Loving, a marriage in black and white, and I think recently the winner of the PEN Oakland Josephine Miles Award for literary fiction, the literary award. So congratulations to you on that, Joan. Her writing has appeared in Alaska Quarterly Review, Washington Post, Ebony, Executive Female, and many more. Her recognitions include a National Lesbian and Gay Journalist Association, as well as a finalist award for both the PEN Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction for her novel, Mama's Child, and Arts and Letters Susan Affett Prize in Creative Nonfiction. So we're in stellar company today. I was grateful to learn and read about Jewelle, and it's been one of the pleasures of my summer to read and reread the Gilda Stories, which were a revelation to me, a genre-bending narrative featuring a queer vampire. It's not only a tremendous story, but offers revelatory new insights into history and queer identity. It tells a story of people doomed or maybe blessed to make homes and forge communities and places where they never feel entirely welcome, no matter how much they contribute. Jewelle, too, has forged a place for herself in American literature, and in doing so, made a place for generations of writers who do not fit what Audre Lorde calls the mythical norm, that is, straight, white, mostly male. Her newest book of poetry is what Lucille Lang Day says, both eloquent and wise, and I'm grateful that she said yes to this reading today, and I will hand this over to both she and to Joan.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Lovely introduction.
Yeah.
It's my honor and delight to be in the role of interviewer to Jewelle, who is an old friend and someone I have admired. And over the years, actually, I admire her more and more, the breadth of her work. She's a poet, she's a novelist, she's a playwright, she's a columnist, she's an essayist. I mean, there's nothing that Jewelle doesn't write. And to start us off, I wanted to ask you, Jewelle, what was the impetus for your first writings and what were they? I didn't know if you published the lipstick poem papers first, the book of poetry before the Gilda stories. So I thought you actually started as a poet, but I just wanted to ask you, what launched you inside? What was the impetus?
Well, yes, the lipstick papers was my first publication. I self-published it. I will say, though, Edward R. Murrow is responsible for me being a writer. When I was young and Edward R. Murrow did all of the documentaries on television about World War II and about the economics of farm workers. I just was mesmerized by the ability to explore lives and issues that were really, really important, but often not looked at. And so I wanted to be a broadcast journalist, I think from probably the time I was about 12 years old. And I always wanted to write, but I thought I would be a journalist. So I actually did go to Columbia School of Journalism, and I did a little bit of journalism, and I worked in TV for a little bit, but I actually found out it wasn't something that fit me really, really well. And one of my advisor at Columbia said, well, Jewelle, when you write about something that you're very interested in, you do really well. But if you're not that interested in the topic, it's just kind of mediocre. And I said, oh, great. Well, you've just given me my direction. I should just write about what I'm interested in. And from then on, that's really what I did, which is one of the reasons I enjoy writing a column for the San Francisco Bay Times, because I only write about what I'm interested in. And then, I started writing poetry. And I think I've told this story a number of times, but it's kind of, I often feel I'm in the right place at the right time in some of my choices around my career and my life. So I used to live in the West Village in Manhattan. And I started writing poems, little short poems, and I wasn't doing anything with them. I was just kind of keeping them in my journal. And I lived in this great old apartment building, and I used to see this woman, older woman, and she was kind of brash, and you were a little bit afraid of her because you didn't know what she was going to say. And she said to me one day, "So, what do you do?" And I said, and I guess I was like 25. I said, I'm a poet. Have I read anything? And I said, well, I don't think so. I haven't published anything. She said, well, don't wait for them to publish you. Just publish yourself. And I was like, okay. So I went upstairs and I told my roommate, I said, you know that lady on the elevator with the wild gray hair? She told me I should publish myself, and I think I'm going to listen to her. And my roommate said, that was Grace Paley, you idiot. And I said, oh my God, I've been talking to Grace Paley in an elevator. And all this time I had been terrified. And so I did Grace Paley tells you what to do, you do it. So I did, and I self-published my first books. And then, several years later, she and I read on different programs together. And I said, Grace, you're the reason I am here today with these book of poems. And she just laughed, that cackle she had. And it was great. It was like the most inspiring thing. She knew, as a woman, and certainly as a woman of color, I had to take the reins in my own hands. And so that's how I started publishing my own poetry.
Wow. What a wonderful story. That is amazing.
It was amazing. It was amazing to me. I still, I still offer thanks to her as an ancestor for
Mhm.
that, for just being out there enough to say, go for it yourself, you know.
Well, it's interesting you're saying you're offering thanks to her as an ancestor, because I've noticed in so much of your writing over the years, the theme of ancestors.
Mm,
Obviously, that's the way you conceptualize, her, and then many other kinds of your ancestors. And you've written in a lot of your poetry is about ancestors, and some of your columns, your Bay Times columns. You've certainly written about your mother and other ancestors. So, and in Gilda, there's a lot about
yeah.
the search for home, the search for community, the search for home. Well, there's so many themes that are relevant in that book, like Black lesbians, how to find one's own power,
Yeah.
oneself, and use it responsibly, and the search for community and home and land. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, or would you like to read something?
Well,
Gilda?
I'll talk a little bit about it. I have something I will read. I realized as I got toward the end of creating the novel, The Gilda Stories, that the whole sense of building community, creating family, and how to live responsibly were very much at the core of what I was writing in this, vampire novel. I was using a sort of philosophical or spiritual belief in community and family, and our service to those as a way to make the world a place in which we might want to live. And I think that does follow through with all of my writing, pretty much. And so the Gilda Stories, which I have to say, thanks to Nancy Veriano for deciding to publish it in her press, Firebrand Books, in 1991. So it's been in print continuously for more than 30 years, which is kind of extraordinary for a book from an independent press. And City Lights did the 25th anniversary edition, and I feel really grateful to that, because it has, each generation takes something different from the ideas, I think, that I'm trying to propagate. So I would love to read, it's a kind of a poem, and it was in the theater piece. I was commissioned to write a theater piece based on 2 chapters of the Gilda Stories for Urban Bushwoman Dance Company. This was a while ago, and it toured for about a year. And I ended up taking the monologues and putting them in a collection of my poems. And so this is one of them, and I think it's in the same theme that we've been talking about. It's called Gilda Sings Escape. There's a dream I have of cotton, unlike what you'd know, balls, unskeined, unrefined, rough and tender at the same time, but still white. Dreamy puffs perched elegantly in coarse leaves, waiting to make me bleed. It feels much like braiding my hair, but my flesh catches in the prickly fiber. That I bleed is a surprise, such soft stuff. Blood-spattered balls leave my load too light. And you can't return to the rose. They move on their own, never waiting, never helping. The rose breathe independent. You can't return to fill the sack once you've passed by, once the blood is drawn. The shape of my life is motion, through fields, through time, through blood. Each decade is woven into the next, embroidered centuries draped across my shoulders, a rainbow of lives, everyone my own. Behind me, 150 years of those I've loved, those I've lost, all taking or giving blood, dangerous, reviving, vital. The thin red line I follow down one row, up the next, a rhythmic dance draws the attentions of the gods, Yemeya, Yellow Woman, and many others. I am enamored of motion. Someone said to me once, it must be hard in this world being Black, descended from slaves, buked and scorned, benign neglect. I said, no, actually it's being 200 years old that pulls my patience. To live forever is a puzzle, each piece snapping into place beside the next, but the picture never fully seen. Still, I don't know all I want to about the past. It will not lie down and die. The past follows as easy as the wind circling the coast, then sits up, stiff against plump pillows, waiting for my embrace, hoping I will lay it open with a skillful blade and let the guts of memory splash onto me, freeing blood for the stories of what really went before. When I stole away, not to Jesus, I took the knife I needed to do the cutting. The stories that flow between us like blood are the river of change, our reason to struggle, the repository of hope. The past is not just a dream. It's the place I visit on my way to the next 200 years.
Wow. That is so strong. Thank you. It is a very emblematic jewel. and you know, emblematic of Gilda, I think, the celebration of Black life without ignoring the oppression. But like, no, I'm not gonna, you know, say go around moaning. And that and again, the past being the locus of power, partly for the hope of the future.
Yes, I'm a firm believer in that. And I think one of the issues, certainly in this country and probably in others, is that we think we can just say, oh, I'm sorry that happened, let's move on. And in reality, we need to think about what actually happened, not pave it over, but kind of excise the poisons, and look at the PTSD that is a fallout, certainly for people of color who've been abused and mistreated, but for all the citizens who lived through this sense of unreality of what the country is really about. And for a country that started, you know, by people who were cast out of another country and then built the country on the backs of others who they dehumanized, it's almost impossible to imagine that we haven't had more civil unrest than we've had so far, until we are able to bear open, split open what's happened and get people to come to terms with it. It's really, it's very sad, you know.
Toure has an interesting essay today in the New York Times about the show Atlanta. He calls it the blackest show on TV. The reason that he said it is the blackest show is because it shows this surreal lives of Black people. That you just never know. Like, he uses the image, you could be walking down a sidewalk and you don't know when a trap door is going to open. But then again, everything looks, quote, normal. So you're just dealing with all these different realities. So that's kind of what you're talking about, the the surreal aspect of Black people and all people in this country.
Mm-hmm.
with
Yeah, yeah. I recently saw this film, Causeway, and it stars Jennifer Lawrence and what's his name? Brian Tyree. I'm looking it up because Brian Tyree Henry. And it was, I think it was a Netflix film, and it just came out, and it was about the PTSD these two characters have, and the Jennifer Lawrence character, because she has just come back from war and has had a traumatic brain injury, and how she has to recover from that and then readjust to being in the world. And the Brian Tyree Henry character has had a very traumatic thing happen to him. And they both live in New Orleans. And so it was interesting to put a Black man and a young white woman in the same framework of trauma and recovery in New Orleans, which is as fabulous as it is still a Southern place. And you don't know when the ground is going to open up underneath either one of them. And she's actually a lesbian, although that plays a small part in the story. But it was interesting to see a woman military person treated for PTSD. Usually it's men who are coming back from the war who've been killers, and she was an engineer. And it was very, very interesting. And I thought, this is how we begin to unpack the pain that, I mean, they have to confront each other around certain kinds of pain and certain kinds of ways they deal with each other. And I thought it was a really interesting film. And how we do it on an everyday basis, with each other.
And that's what a lot of your poems in
Yes.
nice segue into that. Yeah, and I wrote down the name of the film. Thank you. So I wanted to ask you about this volume. What was the impetus again for this volume? And then I would love for you to read some of the poems in it, which are so powerful.
Okay. Well, first I have to say, I went to a conference. This is, I don't know, 5 years ago. Golden Crown Literary Society is a lesbian literary group, and they have a conference gathering. I think it's every year. It's pandemic. It's been difficult, but I think it's back on this year. So I went there. This is probably 5 years ago. And I was walking through the merch room, looking at all the books and the pens and different things people were offering. And I see this table, and there are two African-American women there. And it has a banner, and it says, Black Lesbian Feminist Press, BLF Press. And I thought I had stepped through, a doorway to some other dimension. And I stopped and I looked at it, and I looked at the women. I said, wow, this is your press? And they said, yes, we're just starting, and we're doing da 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 da. And I said, you don't have to say anything else. I just want to be looking at you and looking at your sign. And turns out this Stephanie Andrea Allen, who is the publisher, I think she's done at least 5 books now. And I said, I really give me your flyers or whatever, so I can take them home and figure out how I can be supportive, whether that means, I'll make a small donation, or make sure I buy your books when I can come to your website. And then she says to me, aren't you Jewelle Gomez? And I said, well, yes. She said, oh, we're so honored. I said, no. You're the one who's honoring me by surviving. Everything we did in the 70s and 80s and 90s was in the hope that we would someday see a banner that said BLF Press, and Kitchen Table opened up a lot of doors for women of color. and now they're gone, and you're here, and I am honored to be standing in front of your table. So then, I started reading their books, and I love their books, and they had a call for poetry manuscript because they wanted to do a new collection. And I had been, I think I blurbed a couple of their books because they do publish a lot of speculative fiction. Stephanie Andrea Allen has written some fabulous speculative fiction. And so I wrote to her and I said, I would love to send you my most recent poems, but I don't want you to feel weird about it because I'm your supporter. No matter what you do, I'll be happy to blurb any book that you publish that looks good, and I will always be your supporter, but I don't want you to feel that you have to publish my book of poems just because I send it. I said, it might not fit what you want to do. It might not fit in your, lineup of what's coming up, blah, blah, blah. So they said yes. And so this is where this collection comes from. Once they said yes, I had to scurry and make sure I felt like the books were worthy of BLF Press and these young women who are trying to make a go of an impossible, being a publisher and an independent publisher on your own is like impossible. And so that's how Stillwater came into being. And I realized I had a bunch of poems that talked about Black Native culture, identity more than the culture, but Black Native identity. And I wanted that to be the kind of core of the book. And I had this great photograph, so I had to I had to have a book to have this photograph on, which I've had, all of my life. And it's always up in my writing room. And I feel like if I could make the poem stand up to the strength of that picture, I would do fine.
That's beautiful, Jewelle. And that is a fabulous photograph. Carol and I have been looking at it and looking at your mom. It's like, oh my God, there you are.
Yeah, it's pretty great. I was raised by my great-grandmother, who's the person holding me.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother, the person on the other side of me, always lived right around the corner. And then my mother, who lived about an hour away. So I had this really strong core upbringing by all of these women who supported my reading habits, which then fed into my writing habits. So I feel very fortunate in that. Again, right place, right time.
I was going to say that. Come on, you meet Grace Paley in the elevator, and then you go to a conference, and there's the Black lesbian.
And when I first started doing the Gilda stories, they were all individual stories. I hadn't quite done the editing to make it a novel. And I gave it to my grandmother. And I said, I'm thinking about doing the work on this and making it a novel. And my grandmother, like everyone in my family, were just voracious readers. And my grandmother read it and gave me the most fabulous editorial feedback. She loved it. She gave me this great editorial feedback. And also gave me as a gift really like a first edition, the annotated Dracula.
Oh my God.
That she bought. She tracked it down in some secondhand store in Boston, and it's huge, it's about that thick. And it just was it was beautiful. So that's why Gilda got to be what it got to be. And that's why this book of poems got to be what it got to be.
Wow. What beautiful stories. So would you read us some from Stillwater?
I will. I'll start with the colored lesbian poem, because I like writing amusing poems, I need to put the word lesbian in a poem, since so many are eager that I don't. And the words colored and lesbian together confound them, as if I paired up a flamingo and a bear. I'm offered umbrellas under which I can relax comfortably queer, in case the word lesbian might give me sunstroke or embarrass other people of color, especially those still perched suspicious on stoops back in my old hood. Don't get me wrong, I like the word queer. It's convenient. It could mean Castro or Christopher Street or a restaurant in Dogpatch, an off-Broadway bar, a metrosexual who gets his nails manicured, or your former roommate who doesn't mind being mistaken for a lesbian. Queer cuts down on the growing list of letters that sit like slots in a post office, waiting for the mail to arrive and be slipped in cozy as a single idea that never changes, but of course it always does. Queer does help me remember I am not alone in my slot. We are all connected to another letter, another world, another way of being. But the slot is important too. It's a nest carefully built over years from twigs of history and the blood from birth and wounds. It provides a place to nest and reminds me I'm not a tiny bird who steps off into the air, then crashes to the ground beneath the heels of others who don't see my feathers. The stack of nests makes a whole. The individual ideas of who we are creates a world that challenges and piques interest. So I hug the word lesbian tight to my breast, where my lover rests her head at the end of the day. I write colored lesbian on the pillow that I put between my knees in bed at night to align my hips and keep arthritis at bay. I painted on my high femme dresses so men on the street don't mistake me for just another bird on whom they prey. I sing it out when asked a question, even if the inquiry has nothing to do with sexuality, just in case there's another colored lesbian in the room who thinks she's alone. I type it into Google search every day, then pull up the Herstory archives and legal cases and Mabel Hampton, hoping to create a critical mass so that lesbian porn doesn't always pop up first. I wear it on a button when I visit old people in their active living communities, just to remind them I'll be living with them soon, and some sisters are already there. I do love having choice. I could be woman identified, a woman loving woman, same gender loving, or queer. Any umbrella that might keep the wrath of men from raining down on me. What more, I love writing the words, a colored lesbian is a colored lesbian is a colored lesbian, as a more mindful Gertrude might have said. And saying the words taste good in my mouth, just like that other word, you know, pussy.
That is just such a great poem. I just love it. I'd read it, but I hadn't heard you read it before. Yeah, using humor, you know, for something real and serious is always, I think, a delightful technique.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people are saying, why do you have to use the word lesbian? Why can't you use this? Like, I have no desire to invisibilize myself. And it doesn't mean I don't get along with other people. So therein lie that poem.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to read this other poem that we talked about before, in thanks to you, Joan, for your wonderful work and your recent book, Loving. And it's interesting that we both, I think, have, for good reason, focused in on interracial marriages and what they mean in our culture and how dangerous they can be, both for the people involved and the people who are the issue, the children of such a union. So This poem is called Loving, and it's dedicated to Mildred and Richard Loving, who were arrested for being married because she was Black and Native and he was white. And I also dedicate it to my mother and stepfather, Dolores and Judy LeClaire. Loving. The parallels, embedded like deep mud ruts in a country road. One, I wished I'd traveled to meet that couple, to learn what allowed them to see each other, Indian and colored, living with white. An uneasy mix for my own mother, further north, but not that much later than the Lovings. Mm-hmm. New England was not Virginia, but maybe it is when it comes to color. Mildred testified they burned a cross on her lawn in the 1950s while she and Richard fought to be a married couple in their home state. Up north in the 1960s, there was no cross. They just burned trash in front of my mother's flat, small orange flames reflected in living room glass, blaze enough to scare. Virginia called its law a protection of racial integrity, as if whiteness is a land whose borders must be guarded. Perhaps it is. When asked if he wanted to send a message to the Supreme Court, Richard Loving said, "Tell them I love my wife." Truth so plain and simple, so complex and terrifying, only those 4 words convey it. My mother's husband said it many times in the privacy of their little flat and before our family. His own turned away, declaring him dead when he married her. One Christmas, he gave her 20 tiny bottles of perfume, each delicately wrapped by large cab driver hands, admiring the little bows and the loving which went into each. I saw into a deep place that words could not reach. He made a choice to lose sisters and sons in order to love my mother. Not much darker than him, really, but from another universe in the mind of their small town. Now I imagine walking down that dry Virginia road to that rural place that held Mildred and Richard in their embrace, even when the sheriff would not. They'd invite me to sit in the yard beside a well-used tire swing to drink a glass of sweet tea. I'd ask them how they learned the secret, so I'd know what it meant to my mother and how her husband felt fashioning those ribbons, and what it might mean to me walking on a similar path, holding hands with a woman, she and I loving.
That is such a strong poem. And you have so much in there.
It's one of the reasons I started writing fictions. My poem kept getting longer and longer.
No, it's beautiful. There's so much history, as there is in all of your work. And you have the last section of Still Water. There's a lot of history as you are searching for a different part of your ancestry. I think we have time for maybe one more poem. Yes, Mary?
Okay, great. Yes, I was raised by my great-grandmother, who was part Iowa Indian, and she married a Wampanoag in New England. And the Wampanoag were the original inhabitants, and they are the ones that the Puritans tried to kill off in their quest for turkey dinner. So my mother, my great-grandmother told me about the lineage, and my mother did a lot of research before she passed away, and she put me in touch with this woman, Minewa, in New England, in Rhode Island, who did the naming ceremony for my mother as well as for me. So I'm going to read the naming. 1. Deep, you said, not like we did in the 60s, looking for meaning in random signs or gems or yogis. Deep, as in waves cutting a channel through rock, shaping new land. We met at the bed of my mother, dying with a grandeur lacking in life. Mother, who'd always loved strays more than she loved me, searched for our history and found a guide to her grandmother's and to her name, which had been stolen when pilgrims came ashore, quote, discovering and divining. They determined to turn us to a suicide they called religion, burning our language along with our wetus. They harpooned whales with ease and forgetfulness, overplanted the soil, and swallowed lives like starving children. Their great task, making the Bible into Wampanoag to complete our death. Scriptures heavy upon our heads, meant to bury our spirits and our bodies. Although today it yields one silver thing, a dictionary to revive our words and return them to the lips of our children. 2. The East is cold. Once an idea is frozen, it remains forever the same, or cracks and is lost, as it seemed were the Wampanoag, but we were not. Nor now we turn toward home with the ease of a horse staying on its path, the language of its road well tread. We gathered in a New England yard, many colors and ages to find my name, imagining the island 400 years ago, before synthetic fabrics and false fires were used to tell us our names. At our center was a tree which hadn't borne leaves in many years, yet it stood firm, branches spread like a fertile net. Its spindling arms glistened with possibility. There, you decided, deep cut channels, home to abalone, sand dollars, and starfish. Still water for moving slow through stone, leaving my trace embedded in rock, in sand, on the pages of lives. Still water, who touches all shores, past and present, in my journey to the ocean, even as I seem unmoving. Lifting my name from the air that whistled through the bare branches, you lay it across my shoulders, where it now sits as if it were always my own. Ka'ana Tugamuk, still water.
Oh, thank you, Jewel.
Thank you.
That's such an appropriate name for you, because thinking you leaving your trace upon the pages.
Yes, it was very sweet. She asked me, Miniwe asked me to send her my books, and she read all of my books, and that's how she came to my name.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. And I'm sure we could talk more at another time about what that means to you. Do you want to say one closing, comment about what having your name means to you?
Having, a name drawn from Wampanoag culture means pulling my ancestors closer and giving me a fuller circle in which to do my writing and my living, and to honor the family and ancestors who gave birth to me. So I try to write with the name in mind always now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I want to leave time for questions. We only have 10 minutes left. This has just been so rich and full.
It's great to get to talk to you.
I love it. I know. Here we are. Haven't seen you for a while. So are there questions in the chat? I haven't looked. Mary, do you want to organize?
Not yet, but feel free to raise your hand or put a question in the chat, or however you want to contribute, or that's just fine. If the silence overwhelms, of course, I have a question.
Go ahead with your question, Mary.
You know, when I was reading the Guild of Stories, and Joan and I were talking a little bit about this earlier, and then I'd read Stillwater, and it seems that one of the themes in the Guild of Stories is that you're really rewriting the vampire trope, that it's not about taking blood in order to restore your life. The vampires in your book offer life and renewal, and in the process of renewing themselves through blood. And it also seems like these poems are almost an offering back. You're always giving back, either to the ancestors and to those of us reading forward. So how is this theme of reciprocity embedded in your work over time? I confess I haven't read all of it, but I plan to.
Well, I think it's something I gained first from my great-grandmother when I was growing up with her. And I lived with her from the time I was 8 until I was 22. And it was an interesting immersion in a kind of mentality about her place in the world. And even though she had been cut off from Native cultures when she was much younger, and her husband died when she was quite young, but there was a way that she had that I think reflected the culture of the Native American nations that she was a part of. And so I got that, I think, from her. And then as I became more of a feminist and did feminist reading, I feel like there was something in feminist philosophy that was very much akin to that quality of giving in return for whatever you might be getting, and that we all have an interrelated, interconnected lives, and we can't do whatever we're doing for social change without understanding it's all going to be connected. And so I think those three things, I guess, my great-grandmother and Native culture and feminism really helped me use that and filtered through everything that I write, really. And of course, with vampires, it's kind of like obvious. And when I was working on the Guild of Stories, and Nancy Bariano and I started editing, she said, "Jewelle, I don't think you want to write a book in which the main hero, is a serial killer. So perhaps we can reimagine the vampire lore." And that's really what set me on the path to trying to figure out what it is vampires might really want, rather than simply the blood, and how you could figure out how vampires might want to stay connected to mortals. And what could mortals have that would be of interest to vampires, and what kind of exchange would make them feel connected. So
we were just reading Audre Lorde in class, the class I teach at St. Mary's College, and we've decided that we need a new declaration of interdependence rather than declaration of independence. But that notion of that acknowledging difference as a necessary aspect of a healthy culture, rather than trying to eradicate any notion of difference.
Right. We're at a place, I think, where we can start to bring that into education, and so that people who are not yet out in the world but are thinking about social change understand it's that interdependence that gives us our strength, and that we are all very different. And if we stop being afraid of that and look at it and see what it means and how we can celebrate it, we might actually make something of our lives and of the future.
And I think
Audre Lorde is the one who told me that Guild of Stories were really a novel. They weren't a collection of short stories. So
you know Audre Lorde? I
did know Audre when I lived in New York, and I asked her to read, it was a collection of short stories. And I asked her to read it. I had been reading from it publicly for years. And she says, I don't really care for vampires, and I'm not that big with short stories. But she took it anyway, and she said, oh no, this is a novel. You have to work on this. You have to edit it, and it has to be a novel. Again, audiobook tells you something, you know, you get two people telling you something to do, you do it. So that's how it ended up being a novel. And I'm currently working on the sequel to the Gilda stories, called Gilda Blood Relations. So I'm trying to fill in a lot of the emotional stuff for Gilda.
Right. Because that book goes from 1850 all the way to 2050.
2050. And
so
this
huge.
book is going to, it's less of a sequel as much as it's an interquel. So the chapters in it will come between the chapters that are in the Gilda stories. So the first chapter in the Gilda stories is 1850, and then the next chapter is 1890. So the first chapter in this new book comes between 1850 and 1890.
Okay.
And so it's kind of fun. So you get to learn things about Gilda personally you never knew.
Yeah. Any other questions in the audience? Suzanne, sorry.
It's okay. I think I've been reading, I've read several things that talk about how the Native Americans on the East Coast in New England were often, their tribes were often matriarchal. So do you think, I mean, did you get that sense from living with your great-grandmother? Or at least they had more equality between?
Yeah, I think there was more of female, what do you call it, healers, and who had more of respect in different tribes. And the Algonquins certainly, which was the larger tribes, identifier tribes, and linguistic tribe was the Algonquin. They had many situations in which women were healers. And I think you saw that a lot more. And perhaps it was because it was so tight knit, and the tribes were often quite small. You know, the New England tribes may right now occupy sort of Aquina, which is on Martha's Vineyard, and around New England and Cape Cod. So they're very tight knit and close. And I think women tended to benefit from tribal relations, which were that closely knit, as opposed to huge and more warrior, because they were fighting with each other over land. But I felt like my great-grandmother was trying to instill in me a sense of power as a woman, as she did with her daughter, my grandmother. I haven't finished doing all my reading, though.
Wow, this is just so wonderful just to be in your presence, Jewelle. And you know, you have so many arenas of interest and expertise. You know, not only different genres that you write in, but you have a capacious mind, shall we say. And in the same way that you've been at the right place in the right time so often.
Yeah.
You have a large sphere of interests and concerns that you address.
I feel very fortunate, you know, growing up in Boston as a woman of color, as a lesbian, during the Black Power movement, the height of the civil rights movement. There was a whole complication of things working on my identity. And, you know, being in Boston, they were not that happy to have colored people talk about being Bostonians.
Oh, yeah.
So very early on, I had to start to figure out what did that mean, and who was I, and how does it work on me. And I feel very fortunate that I had a family including my father, who was Cape Verdean, who were very interested in who they were culturally and very curious about everybody else's culture. And I think those are the best two things that could have happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank both of you, both for your time and all of your writings. I've been enjoying going through Joan's books as well. I have a whole shelf of Joan over here too. You both have capacious minds and very generous hearts, and it comes through both in the writing and in conversation. So I thank both of you.
Well,
Our
I'm grateful
next-
that I now live in the same town as Joan.
We did for a long time. She was East Coast, and
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So where are you? You're both right there in
We're
Berkeley
both,
then.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Joan's in
I didn't
Berkeley,
know.
I'm in Oakland. And
All
for a
right.
long time I was in San Francisco. So we're now
Okay.
like a stone's throw from each other.
You can shout and hear
So to
each other
speak,
down the road.
right.
Well, our next event isn't until January. We have a little break for the holidays. Our next event is on the 10th of January, which features Suzanne Paris, who is here. Wave, Suzanne, so we can see who you are. Her book, In the Time of Our History, comes out on the 3rd of January. Buy it as a Christmas gift. It'll arrive on their doorsteps right when you need kind of a break from all the fall de roll. You'll have a book to read. So that would be a great idea. Let me know if you have any questions. I will have a video of this event. So if you would like one to pass on to your friends, then I'll
Yeah,
get you that
great.
as soon
Great.
as I can. Anything else from that? Why don't, if you have the capacity in the audience to take off your mute and to clap wildly, you might have kids in the background or whatever, but I want to express my loud gratitude for this
Thank
time.
you. Thank you so much. I feel very fortunate. I look
What?
forward to seeing Suzanne in the new year.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a delight. This was fascinating.
Great.
I'll have to come over to Berkeley just to take you out to lunch and talk
We'll
to you.
do
about all kinds of
a
stuff.
Berkeley gathering.
Yes, sounds good.
Well, one of these days too, we're going to have an Alta Mesa event where we're just going to kind of gather the authors that we've had
Oh,
and just
Oh, yeah.
have a little gala. And
That would be great.
that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I think that would be fun. So
That would be really, really fun.
yeah,
I'll
I can't
organize
wait
it.
to read Stillwater. I just bought it.
Oh, great. Great. Well, that's great. Thank you. And thank you everyone who came and folks who are going to be watching the video. That'll be cool.
yeah.
That'll be cool.
Thank you to Mary and to Alta Mesa Center for the Arts, which has had some amazing people on. So I will look
Thank you.
forward.
Thank you for including me. And that's
Our
a
pleasure.
lively place. I really
Our
appreciate it.
pleasure.